Hi, everybody. One more lecture on Oedipus the King. Last one, I promise. So last time we were talking about the concept of catharsis, as it is classically represented to us in this play, the play that Aristotle uses for his example. You remember catharsis is that purging of Elios and Phobos, pity and fear, through a tragedy of recognition like Oedipus Rex. Recognition accompanied by reversal of fortune, those are Aristotle's terms. Anagnorisis and peripeteia, those key elements of tragic plot. Of the two of them, anagnorisis or recognition being, I think, the key central element to a classical tragedy like this one. That's what we watch the characters going through on stage. First of all, Tiresias, and then, of course, Jocasta and Oedipus. Now, we've also been discussing over these last lectures the role of the chorus in a Sophoclean tragedy a little bit. You'll recall the chorus represents or stands in for the audience on stage. So we are watching that tragic process. I mean, we, the audience, we, the Greek audience, were sitting in that theater of Dionysus, watching the tragedy of recognition unfold. But we're also in the play, so we're watching ourselves watching. There's a very strong sense, then, that we, the audience, are involved in the play itself. Recognition becoming an issue, the issue, not just for the characters of Oedipus Rex, but also for us. As we have discussed, and as I think Sophocles represents very, very powerfully and effectively, recognition always involves a certain degree of pain and compulsion. We turn away first. We don't want to have to look at or deal with what's difficult to deal with or look at. We have to be kind of forced to that moment of anagnorisis. So what I want to talk about in this last lecture is the way in which recognition becomes an issue for us pretending or thinking about ourselves as though we are the Greek audience. What do we prefer to turn away from? What is the play? What kind of thing is the play calling upon us to recognize? And whatever it is, do we do that? Are we able to perform whatever work of recognition the play is calling us to? Us, the Greek audience, and perhaps more broadly, us in general. So that's the question. And now to try to answer this question, which I think is a very difficult one, I want to turn one last time to the story of Oedipus as it is presented, massaged to some extent, by Sophocles. The two main players in this story are, of course, Oedipus and Jocasta. They have a horrific fate, as you know, and one way we could talk about that is to say that they've just had terrible luck, we could say. And that might be how we would talk about it in our society today. They get a really raw deal in life. Oedipus and Jocasta do, in terms of the cards they are played, the way the cookie crumbles, whatever metaphor we wanted to use. And yet, especially in the way that Sophocles sets up or represents or retells this story of the Oedipus myth, I think it's very interestingly evident that neither Oedipus nor Jocasta is what you would call morally innocent or pure. So if we go back to the moment in the Oedipus story, the moment where he actually kills Laius without realizing that that's his father, you'll recall Oedipus has fled Corinth. He's traveling through Greece. He meets this old man at a crossroads. The old man is traveling in a carriage preceded by a herald, which means there's a guy walking along the road in front of the carriage, clearing people out of the way. I'm going to pick up our text. It's on page 109 in our course edition. I'm picking it up from line 800. This is Oedipus telling the story of what happened that day. He says to Jocasta, "Jocasta, I will tell you the whole truth. When I was near that branching of the crossroads, going on foot, I was encountered by a herald and a carriage with a man in it, just as you tell me. He that led the way, and the old man himself, wanted to thrust me out of the road by force. I became angry and struck the coachman who was pushing me. When the old man saw this, he waited for his chance, and as I passed, he struck me from his carriage full on the head with his two-pointed goad. He paid for this in full and more. My stick quickly struck him backward from the car, and he rolled out of it. And then I killed them all," Oedipus says. There's a thing in our law in 21st century Canada, which some of you guys may have heard of. It's called the reasonable person test. It's the test as to whether the way you act or a person acts in a given situation is consistent with what a reasonable person would do. Well, Oedipus in this story, I think, has not acted like what we would call a reasonable person. That tremendously casual line, "and then I killed them all." Oh, like you do. If you get into a bit of a dispute on the street. I mean, and moreover, Oedipus is just telling Jocasta this story now, after he's been king of Thebes for 10 years? They've been married and had children together. He's traveling through Greece. He comes upon this crossroads, old man in a carriage. He gets really angry, kills the old guy and all of his servants. This old guy, who was seemingly quite important, traveling in a carriage with a herald. Then Oedipus comes to Thebes, and the people there say, "Oh, well, our king is missing. He was an old guy who went on a trip and just never came back." Oedipus doesn't even put that together. We've talked a fair bit over the last several weeks about how obvious some of the indicators of Oedipus's fate seem to be. He has this prophecy: "You're going to kill your father and marry your mother." What could he possibly do about that? Well, maybe Oedipus could have decided just not to kill anybody. That might have been a way to go. Maybe he could have decided not to get married, or at least never to marry an older woman. That might have been a way to go, but no. What I'm trying to suggest, and especially with a focus on this story that Oedipus tells about killing the old man, "and then I killed them all," I'm trying to suggest that Sophocles very carefully, I think, tries to attach a kind of scent or cloud of culpability or guilt to Oedipus. Oedipus has done horrible, horrible things. He does not yet know how horrible they were. He did not mean to do those horrible things. And yet, as I have said, Oedipus in other ways does not seem guiltless. Sophocles tries very hard, I think, to give him a little bit of a bad smell. He has done bad things, even if not the bad things that we know he has done. And with Jocasta, we can make much the same point, but even quite a bit more strongly. First of all, we can recall that horrible crime which Jocasta so casually relates herself to have committed. in the wake of the prophecy that she and Laius receive. If you have a baby boy, it's going to kill its father and marry its mother. Jocasta, as I was saying in a previous lecture, she just deals with that summarily, and she's very casual about it. She doesn't even seem to be embarrassed to talk about it. They murdered that baby, and in a very horrific way. With regard to Oedipus, moreover, as I was saying in the last lecture, his name, at least on a traditional interpretation, his name is supposed to mean swollen foot. And so it's another one of those things that maybe Jocasta could have put together a little bit if she had wanted to, when this handsome young man called Oedipus comes to Thebes just after her husband has disappeared. As we go through the tragedy, Oedipus the King, I certainly think that there is a sense in which at some point Jocasta kind of starts to figure it out. Or at least she starts to see what is there to be figured out, even if she declines to figure it out fully. So I'm going to turn now to page 116 in our course book, and I'm looking down at line 976. Oedipus, at this point, has been relieved of his worries. He thinks he has been relieved of his worries that he killed his father, because he's just learned that Polybus has died of natural causes. However, he's still worried about the other part of the prophecy, that he may somehow end up married to his mother. So he says to Jocasta at line 976, he says, "But surely I must fear my mother's bed." Jocasta answers, "Why should man fear, since chance is all in all for him, and he can clearly foreknow nothing? Best to live lightly, as one can, unthinkingly. As to your mother's marriage bed, do not feel fear about this. Before now, many a man in his dreams has lain with his own mother. But he to whom such things are nothing bears his life most easily." A very remarkable little speech by Jocasta, in which, she's saying, first of all, she's saying, well, is marrying your mother really such a big deal? I mean, come on. And then she says in those remarkable final lines, she says, "He to whom such things are nothing bears his life most easily." By that phrase, such things, Jocasta means moral issues that people normally care about. Things like not violating the incest taboo, not having sex with your own mother. Such things, she says. People who don't care about such things live most easily. She's suggesting that the best strategy for Oedipus or for anybody in going through life is just not to care about moral issues. So Jocasta emerges in moments like this in Oedipus the King as a figure who not only, let's say, flirts with being very casually immoral, but even going beyond that is perhaps amoral, in the sense trying to set herself completely outside the circle of morality as it is understood by the ancient Greek audience. He who cares not about such things bears his life most easily. And in this passage we've just been looking at, we can even pause on the little argument that Jocasta makes for Oedipus's benefit, which is founded on the concept of chance. Why should man fear, since chance is all in all for him? That is not, I think, for the ancient Greek audience, that is not how you are supposed to think, let's say, about the moral shape or moral trajectory of a life. You're supposed to think not in terms of chance, but in terms of fate or destiny, which is directed by the gods. So you see, the concept of fate, as the Greeks understand it, is precisely not a concept of randomness, of chance. It's rather a concept of necessity, a necessity that is divinely appointed and directed, and it is explained to them, laid out for them, as we have been discussing, through a whole system of oracles and prophets. What I've characterized as an informational system, that is to say, it's in that network of oracles and prophets that all the answers are to be found, no matter what the questions are. At the same time, it is obviously a religious system for the ancient Greeks, because they really believe in those gods. And finally, of course, it is a moral system, because whatever the gods say goes. And what the gods say is right and good, well, that is necessarily right and good. You have to believe in that stuff as an ancient Greek. Jocasta, it seems, does not. Sophocles represents her, and again, I think represents her very carefully, as a skeptic and even as a rebel. So last time, and I'm going to go back a little bit in the text, back to, it's page 105 in our course book, and I'm going to be looking at around line 723. This, you recall, is where Oedipus has just told Jocasta that he's terribly worried about the prophecy he has received from Tiresias. And Jocasta tries to make him feel better by repeating this oracle that she and Laius had received from Apollo all those years ago, and relating how she and Laius dealt with that just by exposing the baby on a mountainside. And she sums up this little speech at line 73 by saying sarcastically, so clear in this case were the oracles describing the future. Give them no heed, I say. Later, and I'm going to skip ahead to line 848, I think it will be in our text. Later, this is when Oedipus is very keen to question the shepherd who seems to know the truth about the death of Laius. And you'll recall there's this whole issue as to whether Laius was killed by one person or many. Oedipus is holding on to a scrap of hope because this shepherd seems to have said that he was killed by many men, not just one guy. Jocasta says at line 848, she says, be sure at least that this was how he told the story, and he cannot unsay this now, for everyone in the city heard it, not just I alone. But even if he turns from what he said, then not ever will he prove my lord, that rightly the murder of Laius squares with Apollo's words, Apollo, who declared that by his son from me he would be killed, and yet that poor creature surely did not kill him, for he himself died first. That baby lying on the mountainside. As far as prophecy goes, henceforward I won't look to the right nor to the left hand either. That concluding bit of Jocasta's speech is a little bit difficult to grasp. I think we're dealing with a kind of ancient Greek idiom there, which is lost on us. But basically it means, she's basically saying prophecy, schmophecy. Apollo doesn't know blankety blank. And finally, the episode of the messenger who comes from Corinth. And I'm going to turn now to line 945 in our course edition. The messenger who comes from Corinth to tell Oedipus that Polybus, his supposed father, is dead. Jocasta gets this news. She gets very excited. She says to a servant, "Be quick and run to tell the king the news. O oracles of the gods, where are you now? It was from this man Oedipus fled long ago, lest he should be his murderer. And now by chance," that word again, "by chance he is dead, in the course of nature, not killed by him." Oedipus comes on. Jocasta says, "Listen to this man, and when you hear, reflect on what the gods' holy oracles have come to." And finally, the whole episode leads to Oedipus's speech on the next page. This is line 964 now. Oedipus, having heard from the messenger that Polybus is dead, thinks he is completely released from that part of the prophecy that he's fated to kill his father, and he cries out triumphantly, oh dear Jocasta, why should one look to the Pythian hearth?" In other words, the place of the oracle of Apollo. "Why should one look to the Pythian hearth? Why should one look to the birds screaming overhead?" Observation of birds being how prophets work, right? So why should we worry about oracles? Why should we worry about prophets like Tiresias? "They prophesied that I should kill my father, but he's dead and hidden deep in earth, and I stand here who never laid a hand or spear against him, unless perhaps he died of longing for me, and thus I am his murderer. But they, the oracles as they stand, he's taken them away with him. They're dead as he himself is, and worthless." So we're talking about the way in which Sophocles surrounds Oedipus and Jocasta with kind of a bad moral smell. And in this moment, this moment of Oedipus exulting at the news of the death of Polybus. First of all, it's a little iffy to hear that your dad has died and respond, "Yes!" That's not really very nice, I don't think. More to the point, in the ancient Greek context, Oedipus in this speech is exulting because he thinks the oracles are false. He is triumphantly pissing, if you like, on the entire Greek system of oracles, prophets, that system, as we've said, which is at once informational, religious, and moral, that system which is the bedrock and the framework and the fortress of ancient Greek culture. Now, just before this bit of the play that we have been looking at, we have a very, very interesting and powerful episode with the chorus. The chorus, our representatives on the stage, the audience on the stage, and as we have discussed a little bit, this is a very, very formal aspect of ancient Greek tragedy. The chorus is sung. They're divided into several groups, and there's a kind of call and response between the groups. The chorus comes on, in terms of the kind of rhythm of Oedipus the King, the chorus comes on after each sub-episode or major sub-episode of the tragedy. So we get a kind of pause in the action. The chorus comes on and comments in song about what has been going on. So they're both breaking up the main action, and they're kind of underlining it, pointing to what matters in the part of the play that we have just watched or are going to go on to watch. And we have a long song of the chorus. It's on pages 112 to 113 in our textbook. I'm not going to read it all because it's a bit too long, but basically what the chorus says in this long song is they proclaim their own piety, their own fealty to, allegiance to, loyalty to the Greek system of gods and oracles and prophets. And I think I'll skip the first two strophes, and I'll just read the last two. So this is from line 884, where the chorus sings, and we don't know how to sing it, unfortunately. The chorus sings, "If a man walks with haughtiness of hand or word, and gives no heed to justice, and the shrines of gods despises, may an evil doom smite him for his ill-starred pride of heart. If he reaps gains without justice, and will not hold from impiety, and his fingers itch for untouchable things. When such things are done, what man shall contrive to shield his life from the shafts of the god? When such deeds are held in honor, why should I honor the gods in the dance?" And antistrophe answers, "No longer to the holy place, to the navel of earth I'll go." These are references to the oracle of Apollo at Delphi. "No longer to the holy place, to the navel of earth I'll go to worship, nor to Abae, nor to Olympia, unless the oracles are proved to fit for all men's hands to point at. O Zeus, if you are rightly called the sovereign Lord, all-mastering, let this not escape you, nor your ever-living power. The oracles concerning Laius are old and dim, and men regard them not. Apollo is nowhere clear in honor. The gods' service perishes." We, the Greek audience, represented by the chorus, are watching this horrible tragedy of Oedipus the king unfold. Of course, in a very clear sense, we don't want it to unfold. We don't want it to happen. We want to turn away from that horror. That's something that we really care about. We, the Greek audience, represented by the chorus on stage, as in that song that I just read. But there's something we care about even more. There is a higher imperative that is represented by the chorus and by the play, and that is nothing less than the service of the gods. We are talking about, again, the whole foundation and stability and coherence of ancient Greek culture, the moral, religious, informational system of gods and oracles and prophets. That is a boat that the ancient Greek cannot rock. You don't touch that. The chorus is saying, and let's make no mistake about what the chorus is calling for in that song that I just read. The chorus is calling there for the prophecy to come true. The prophecy that has been received by Oedipus and by Jocasta must be fulfilled. It must be proved correct, because if it isn't, there's nothing. There's no gods. There's no Greek world. There's no morality. Apollo must be confirmed. So, we, the Greek audience, we know that Oedipus is going to come to the realization that he has, in fact, killed his father and married his mother. We, the Greek audience, we know that Jocasta is going to come to that same realization, that she has been married to her own son. We know that Jocasta is going to kill herself. We know that Oedipus is going to blind himself. And we, the Greek audience, through the chorus, we call explicitly for all of that to occur. You see, it is terrible for Oedipus's and Jocasta's fate to unfold, but it would be even more terrible for it not to unfold, because that would mean that the gods are false. And that, for the ancient Greek audience, represented by the chorus, that is totally intolerable. It is truly even unthinkable. And so here I think we come close to being able to articulate in some way what we, the Greek audience, aren't prepared to recognize, what we, the Greek audience, turn away from, and maybe ultimately, as we wrap up this final lecture on Oedipus the king will even be able to say something about we, just in the sense of we, not necessarily in the sense that we are pretending to be ancient Greeks, watching Oedipus the king in the theater of Dionysus. Now, this is very, very difficult stuff. I don't mean that it's troubling stuff. I mean, these are thoughts that it's difficult to hold in your head, let alone to express, but let's give it a try. I think we can break down this concluding part of our reflection on Oedipus the king under the heading, let's say, of two main insights, if they are, in fact, insights. And the first one is this. We think we don't want to see Oedipus and Jocasta recognize their fate. We think we don't want to have to watch that. We don't want that to happen. But in fact, we do want that as the ancient Greek audience, because, as I've just been arguing, if they don't have to recognize their fate, there is no fate. That means there is no morality from the ancient Greek point of view. There are no gods. And that, again, is just completely out of the question. That possibility must be ruled out totally and utterly. And therefore, they have to suffer in exactly the way that we know they are going to. This, I think, you guys, this, I think, is why Sophocles, in terms of his artistic management and presentation of a story that is already extremely well known, this, I think, is why Sophocles so carefully constructs both Oedipus and Jocasta as vaguely guilty, vaguely immoral. They did not have the bad intention to do what they in fact did, but they have had and have acted upon some bad intentions. In Jocasta's case, even some very bad intentions. But for that matter, Oedipus flying into a rage and killing 5 people at a crossroads, that's pretty bad too. Sophocles tries very hard to give these two main figures, these two main players in the Oedipus story, a kind of bad moral smell, as I have said. And he does this, I think, because the ancient Greek morality demands that their fate be fulfilled. It demands that they suffer, and even more than that, it demands that it be right that they suffer. That they deserve it in some way, even though their fate comes as a surprise to them. So we, the ancient Greek audience, the chorus, we call for their fate to be fulfilled. We carry this mother and this son out to expose them to their destiny, just as this mother carried this son out to expose him on the mountainside at the beginning of the Oedipus myth. And the second point, why? Why do we do that? Why do we, the Greek audience, call for Oedipus and Jocasta to suffer? Well, that's easy. We call for that to happen on behalf of or in service to the gods. Jocasta, as I said earlier in the lecture, is kind of presented by Sophocles as a kind of rebel to the Greek system, certainly as a skeptic about the Greek system, somebody who is more than willing to see and assert what is questionable or dubious or even foolhardy in the ancient Greek system of gods and oracles and prophets. Jocasta, if you like, asserts the right to discard the gods and the whole cultural and informational system that surrounds the gods in the ancient Greek world. To that attitude, this play says, absolutely no way. It doesn't matter who must die. It doesn't matter who must suffer. From the ancient Greek perspective represented in Oedipus the king, the authority of the gods must be protected at all costs. And What I'm trying to say is that we, the ancient Greek audience, I don't mean to suggest that we are called upon by the play to recognize anything about that attitude, about that idea. Rather, we are called upon by the play to refuse to accept, to refuse to countenance the idea that there even might be anything to think about in the informational, moral, and religious system of our culture. There must be nothing to see there, nothing questionable there. That, in the end, is the attitude that I think we, as the Greek audience, are called upon to take up by this play. Which means that in the end, Oedipus the king, even though it's a very powerful piece of art, even though the experience of watching Oedipus the king in the ancient Greek world, I think certainly would have been an emotionally devastating one. You are going to come out of this play absolutely drenched in sweat and tears as you have undergone that cathartic experience provided by the terror and pity of Sophocles' tragedy. So it's a tumultuous, disruptive text and experience, but in the end, I think we can say the text is profoundly conservative. And perhaps that's part of why it was so extremely successful in the ancient world. The play makes its victims undergo recognition. But the play and the audience turn away themselves from that same challenge. We are supposed to kind of shake our heads over Oedipus and Jocasta, but deliver them to their fate in a state of moral certainty. We never turn our gaze on that very certainty. Quite the contrary. We, the Greek audience, represented by the chorus, we explicitly refuse to question or even examine the moral certainty of that ancient Greek system of gods, temples, oracles, prophets, etc. So, a question to conclude our look at Sophocles' play, and a question not just for we, the Greek audience, but for we, as we are, grant that every society, in a sense, has its oracles. Every society, in a sense, has its prophets. Every society, in a sense, has its gods, which is simply to say things that are placed beyond question, things that are placed beyond questionability, even as the gods are in the ancient Greek world. So I want to wrap up our look at this play by asking what ours are. And let's be pretty certain that we have some gods in this broad sense. What oracles, what prophets do we defend and protect at all costs? What are we in our society placing beyond question? What are our gods?